All right. Good afternoon. My name is Kirsten Kumpfbala. I'm Associate Professor of Instruction in German in the Division of World Languages, Literatures, and Cultures. I'm also the Director of the Anne Frank Initiative at the University of Iowa. In 2022, I was deeply honored by the selection of my application to plant the 13th Anne Frank sapling on the University of Iowa campus. Every year, I teach a seminar on Anne Frank and her story, and over the course of my teaching career, I have mentored several honors teaching practicum students and Office of Undergraduate Research Fellows, like Anna Laura Laser, whom you'll hear from shortly. It is such a pleasure to welcome you all to today's special multilingual reading of the Diary of Anne Frank. This gathering is a celebration of some of the diverse voices and cultures that make up our community. It's a beautiful reminder that stories like Anne's transcend borders and languages. Today, as we hear powerful passages written by Anne, who, if she had survived, would have celebrated her 95th birthday this year, we are reminded of the ways in which language connects us and offers us new perspectives and deeper understanding. This reading is part of a larger festival, the UNESCO City of Literature Iowa City Book Festival, which is dedicated to bringing excellent free literary program to our community. We hope you'll enjoy this inspiring event. And now I'd like to hand the microphone over to Anna, who will introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Anna Laura Laser. I'm a junior at the University of Iowa, and I'm an OUR fellow working under Professor Kumpfbala's guidance. I'm a Jewish student, and I'm originally from Brazil. I'm so excited to introduce our lovely speakers today.
So I just wanted to provide a little bit of context first before we go into the various readings here. Anne Frank, born in 1929 in Frankfurt, Germany, grew up speaking German, but her Jewish identity forced her and her family to flee to the Netherlands when she was just 4 years old, seeking refuge from the Nazis. In Amsterdam, Anne had to adapt to a new language, learning Dutch in school and using it with her friends. Her multilingual journey continued even in hiding, where from 1942 to 1944, she studied under the auspice of her father, Otto, French and English. Within the annex, there was the understanding that no one would speak German. They had rules on language. Quote from Anne Frank, "It is necessary to speak softly at all times. Only the language of civilized people may be spoken, thus no German," end quote. They also did not want to read German books, except for the classics and works of a scholarly nature. However, when Anne was upset, the rule would be broken. "I was so upset, I started speaking in German." Language was central to Anne's life and writing. She even corresponded in English with Juanita Wagner from Danville, Iowa, a letter that can be seen today at the Danville Museum just an hour from here. Throughout her diary, Anne reflects on the power and nuances of language, a testament to her enduring curiosity and desire to connect with the world beyond her confined space. The diary is now translated into 73 languages, the most recent one being Maori. The book has sold over 30 million copies in more than 60 countries. Our reading today will have participants reading translations in the order that they were published. On that note, I will hand the microphone back to Anna, who will be introducing our speakers. Just know that we will be having each participant read their passage, and if the participant feels comfortable and would like to share a few reflections in English, and then we will hand the microphone over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Barka. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Theodore Rosengarten. Dr. Rosengarten is a writer, teacher, and social activist in South Carolina. Originally from Brooklyn, New York, he earned his bachelor's degree from Amherst College and his PhD in the history of American civilization from Harvard University. From an early age, Dr. Rosengarten has been dedicated to issues of justice and equality, focusing specifically on the Black struggle for civil rights and the Holocaust. His first book, All God's Dangers, The Life of Nate Shaw, is a powerful oral history of a Black tenant farmer from Alabama and won the National Book Award in 1975. Recently, he published a critical review of Stephen Katz's The Holocaust and New World Slavery in Yad Vashem Studies. On a lighter note, Dr. Rosengarten has also coached women's soccer, so if his talk goes offside today, just remember he knows how to call off a penalty kick. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Theodore Rosengarten.
It works. Hello, everybody. The first thing I want to do is to thank Kirsten and the Anne Frank Initiative at Iowa for inviting me to this really incredible event, the reading of from Anne Frank by her next generation of readers in their own languages. It's really terrific. As I look around the room, I could be, but I could be corrected as well. I could be the only person who was alive when Anne Frank was alive, which is like, whoa. I have a couple of other suspects, but I'm not sure about that. Okay. We have a lot of actually other things in common. My family, a good part of my family is German Jewish and left Germany for reasons similar to hers. Her father, when her father, Otto Frank, took the family out of Germany in 1933, when did he leave? In 39? He didn't go far enough. He went next door to the Netherlands. Mine came to the United States. There was a joke in my family always that Hitler never got us. Hitler couldn't get us. And it was because most of my family was murdered during World War I. So not much of a joke, but the family took notice of it. Anne Frank and I both wanted to grow up and be writers. She certainly succeeded. And curiously, when the war came and Nazi occupation and her hiding, it did not kill her hope, quite the contrary. And in the numbers of diaries which are kept by the repository in Jerusalem, Yad Vashem, there's some 165 diaries. Several people who said, oh, they had hoped to be writers and now they knew that would never happen. For Anne, it was quite different. She felt that the war and the occupation were giving her a terrific opportunity, and she had hoped to use the material that went into her diary for books after the war, particularly for a novel she had hoped to write. And when she heard in 1944, after almost 2 years of essentially captivity and hiding, she heard on radio the Dutch cultural minister in exile in London in Dutch people, hold on to your journals, hold on to your records, hold on to whatever kind of records you're making of the occupation. We're going to collect them when the war is won and serve them for future generations of the Dutch who will know what had happened. We know that Anne's was not the only diary being written in seclusion in that hiding place. Her sister Margot was writing as well. Margot's diary never turned up. So we wonder what happened to it. We know she was writing it. Her father and their chief helper, Miep Gies, had observed her writing it. And it's interesting what possibly happened. When Anne and her family were arrested, her papers were scattered on the floor of the annex and of her room, and Miep Gies picked them up and took them and put them in the drawer of a piece of furniture in the office part of the building, not in the living part, whereas it's very possible that Margaret had her papers stored, in fact, in the annex. All of that furniture was confiscated by the Nazis and their Dutch allies and given out to Dutch people. It's partly as a kind of a reward for collaboration, and that was lost. It's also possible that Margaret had kept the journal with her, her journal she was writing, kept it in her pack, which would have been lost in the next stop that they made after their arrest in the Westerbork transit camp, or was taken to Auschwitz and lost at Auschwitz. As Kirsten was saying, the families insisted, and it's not a surprise, Anne insisted on writing in Dutch and not in German. And she describes in the diary how she felt that Germans had robbed them of their nationality, and she would not any longer write in German. She was also only 4.5 years old when she moved to the Netherlands, and her whole schooling had been in Dutch, and her friends were Dutch, and she wanted to regard herself then as Dutch. So she had her language, she had a place to read and write, she had books. Books were plentiful in the secret annex and were supplied as well by their Dutch helpers, by Miep Gies in particular. And she had a subject, and the subject was herself. And and she had a lot of opinions. And as she writes in diary several times, and she actually, this is something that I think Anne has in common with a number of the people who will be reading today and have been thinking about her. And that is, she said, it's a very hard time for us young'uns to hold ground and maintain our opinions in a time when all ideals are being shattered and destroyed, when people are showing their worst side and do not know whether to believe in truth or right. Well, I think there's some analogies that could be made to the situation today, especially for young people trying to discern what is true and what is not true. And I think our readers share that the feeling that, in fact, or many of them do, that their opinions are not valued, that young people's opinions in general are not valued. And I read some of the statements that our readers have written about their motivation for taking part in this event. And they said, we aren't allowed to have opinions. Or to me, having a voice is everything. Or another, kids are open to new ideas, and because of this, they are wiser than anybody else. And I think of that, and I think also it refers to actually what I would call, if anything, the theme of these remarks, which was a comment by the great Russian writer Lev Tolstoy. Tolstoy, at the end of his life, was teaching in rural Russia, was teaching children. Tolstoy, a lot of people don't know this, was a very profound influence on Mahatma Gandhi and on Martin Luther King as well, who read his late works. And Tolstoy said, I don't know whether we should teach children to write or they should teach us. And this was after years of working with kids. So it's sometimes translated to, I don't know whether we should teach children to read or they should teach us. But read or write, that was Tolstoy's sentiment. And I think it's something that I certainly share as a teacher and have been sharing, and now as a parent and a grandparent. Another thing Anne remarked, and it sounds almost incredible, she said, we here live in paradise. We are living in paradise. And she was referring to the place of captivity, to the annex. She said, compared to people who live on the outside. And I think, as with many people who are in hiding, they realized that the world outside of where they were hiding was a trap certainly for Jewish people. Well, I wanted, most recently, I visited the room where she worked in Amsterdam. I wanted to take my 10-year-old, he was 9 at the time, just not 10 now, grandson, Javier, to show him where his grandfather works and teaches. And I should say, at the beginning, for the past 30 years, I've been teaching courses on the Holocaust, including courses on children and the Holocaust at the College of Charleston in South Carolina and the University of South Carolina. And I really wanted to take my 9-year-old. I think, how old should a person be when that person is experiencing kind of, or is learning about various sort of atrocities in history? In this case, particularly the destruction of the Jewish people. Also, I wanted my grandson to see where his ancestors came from. I had been, as part of my teaching, taking students on studies abroad to Poland since the late 1990s. These are Holocaust-themed studies. We go to Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, when we could go to Ukraine, Germany, and the Netherlands. And we go to Poland, and because in Poland, the Germans carried out, or all 6 of the camps that were set up primarily or to murder Jewish people and other enemies of the Nazi regime were established, all 6, Auschwitz being the largest and sort of most notorious, but all dreadful. Auschwitz and Sobibor, the 2 camps where the people from the Netherlands were sent. But I also was bringing my son on this recent trip. This was this past July, so that my son and now his son could see where their grandfather was working and teaching. And we had decided to, what I would say, go light on the Holocaust. Not going to visit camps. We're going to visit. Poland's a very beautiful country, very green country. People don't know this about Poland. Poland by itself could feed all of Europe. All of its dairy, all of its vegetables, all of its meat is rich enough, which is why it's been torn apart by its enemies to the east and the west, the Russians and Germans, for centuries. And meanwhile, my grandson was keeping a diary of his own. It was a diary of the skateboard parks in Poland. So Warsaw, Łódź, Krakow, then finally we went to Amsterdam. That was his kind of initial interest. But on the second day of the trip, my son sent a note to me and he said, let's skip this and do the real stuff. Let's show Javi why we're here and what it is you do. And it was the most amazing trip for me, one of the most of my life. And Javier turned out to be a total sponge, taking in everything. He asked questions that my students would have been shamed to hear that he could not ask. And he struggled to deal with the kind of a question of emptiness. And there's I know that some people here have been to Krakow, the beautiful city in the south of Poland. Krakow has had a large Jewish population before World War II. Now, a very, very tiny number of Jews, not enough, in fact, for an active congregation. And there's a memorial in Krakow about twice the size of this room, of empty chairs. That's all it sits in the middle of the city. Here are these empty chairs. And the emptiness is the memorial. And that's what struck Javier on our trip throughout the kind of Polish cities. And I say we were in Poland because that's where Poland had 3 million Jewish people before the World War II, of whom 90% were murdered, and all 6 death camps. And we were coming from there. We went to the Netherlands, and Netherlands, particularly to end up at Anne Frank House. Not only the Anne Frank House, there are other memorials, and now an incredible museum, the new National Dutch Holocaust Museum, which for me is the finest museum of its type in the world now. And when we visited the Anne Frank House, one of the first things that Javier noticed in the exhibitions leading up to the annex, as you climb up in the building to the annex, were the material objects that had been left behind by Jewish people, and the material objects, in this case, the material objects that were kept by the Frank family. And there were very nice settings of silverware and books and and the kind of the items that a good middle class and Jewish family kind of would own. And Javier said, Papa said, how different these are, because the objects on display, for example, at a railroad station in Poland, in Łódź, in the various cases, were broken pieces of silverware, broken pieces of pots. And I hadn't even made the connect. And Javier said, Dad, Papa, everything we saw in Poland was in pieces. Here, it's all intact. And he was trying to see the difference between what was happening to the Jewish population who were captive in the Netherlands and the Jews of the East, particularly the Jews of Poland. I use and read Anne Frank's diary in several of the courses I teach. The one where it has certainly the most resonance is the course on children and the Holocaust. The first thing it does is the book reminds all of us about what I would call the veneer of civilization over kind of the bestial nature of people and the bestial possibilities. We see from the book how the Holocaust essentially took place in a modern, industrialized, first world country with educated people, a constitutional republic. You know, some people I know will have heard of the Wannsee Conference. This was a conference in January of 1945 outside of Berlin at a resort that had been owned by Jewish people called Wannsee. 15 heads of German agencies, Department of Labor, Agriculture, Education, whatever, met, and the leader of the meeting, a really vicious Nazi named Reinhard Heydrich, pulled down maps indicating where the Jewish population of Europe lived, and according to his numbers, some at that time 11 to 12 million people. And what he was doing was laying out, here is the program of annihilation, and bringing in and implicating every part of German society. And who are those 15 people? 8 of them had PhDs, 3 of them had 2 PhDs, and were known in Germany as Doctor, depending on what you were. These were educated people who were at the head of this horrific project. People will say about the book, it's not only incredibly important, but was the first of the diaries to come out of the Holocaust to be published. 1947, merely 3 years after Anne's death, 2 years after the end of the war, and 2 years after the liberation of her father, Otto, who was the only survivor of that group in seclusion, the one of 8 people. And he had been handed the journal by Miep Gies, the Dutch woman who was the head of their helpers, that his daughter had left. He was astonished that it survived, and he turned it into a book in more ways than one. He was responsible for doing some editing, so that the book now there are many, many editions. There's a definitive edition, this edition or that edition. The father, when he had her papers, he made some deletions. He he deleted material that had to do with Anne's discussion of her own discovery of sex and her sexuality, with her, particularly too, with her, the attraction she felt for young women, as well as for young men, and for feelings she had about her mother. And I think, actually, that the father was in some way unaware of Anne's growing affection for her mother toward the end of the captivity. So where I feel, again, grateful to him for coming out with the book, I'm also a little annoyed that he made his marks on it. But we know what his marks were, as he wrote in pencil. Anne took her journal with a fountain pen, not a pen that you dip into ink, but a old-time fountain pen with a cartridge you'd fill up and write. There are some marks on the pages in ballpoint pens, but ballpoint pens didn't come into existence till 1951, so they're not original with the journal. Someone else's hand went on it. Her father, Otto Frank, had a as a businessman, had a good eye for a product that could sell, in this case, the journal. And he was also, besides being an entrepreneur, a humanist, and hoped that the publication of the journal would help to prevent future genocides from occurring. And Frank packed so much life into that loft where they lived. But the real world, as we know, would, the one, not the one she imagined, but the real world wouldn't allow her to live and write anymore. But thanks, in fact, to our readers today, to our brave readers that we'll hear from, we can savor the beauty of her prose, and we can grasp her love of life while we struggle with how, in fact, her life ended. Okay, I want to turn this over to the readers, whom I am very excited to hear. Right, thank you. Good.
All right, we are going to begin our reading. Our first reader is Frida Kumpfbala. She's reading in Flemish, the diary entry February 23, 1944.
Oder lese ich beide oder nur das? Wir kicken alle twee naar de blauwe hemel, de kale kastanienboom aan wiens takken kleine druppeltjes schitteren. Naar de meeuwen en de andere vogels die in hun schreeuwlucht wel van zilver liegen. En dat alles ontroerde en pakte ons alle twee zo, dat we niet meer konden spreken. Wir betrachteten den blauen Himmel, den kahlen Kastanienbaum, an dessen Zweigen kleine Tröpfchen glitzerten, die Möwen und die anderen Vögel, die im Tiefflug wie aus Silber aussahen. Das alles rührte und packte uns beide so, dass wir nicht mehr sprechen konnten. This passage makes me think of nature. I love climbing trees. I love playing in my yard with my friends. I can't believe that Anne Frank was not allowed to do this. Every kid should. In nature, I feel free and happy.
Hello. Is it working? Yeah. Rachel Johnson, German, February 12, 1944.
Die Sonne scheint, der Himmel ist tiefblau, es weht ein herrlicher Wind und ich habe solche Sehnsucht. Ich sehne mich nach allem, nach Freiheit, nach Freunden. Ich sehne mich danach, mich aussprechen zu können und allein zu sein. Konnte ich mich einmal richtig ausweinen. Ich musste meine Herzen Luft machen und weiß, es würde besser werden, wenn ich weinen konnte. Aber ich weiß auch, ich kann es nicht. Ich bin unruhig.
Mia Robinson. Mia Robson, French, January 22nd, 1942.
Le 22 janvier 1944, je ne serais plus capable d'écrire ce genre de choses. Maintenant que je lis mon journal après un délai d'un an et demi, Je suis étonnée par mon innocence enfantine. Au fond, je sais que je ne serai jamais encore si innocente en dépit. Étonnée par ma innocence enfantine. Au fond, je sais que je ne serai jamais encore si innocente en dépit de ma volonté de l'être. Je peux bien comprendre le changement d'humeur et les remarques au sujet de Margot, de maman et de papa, comme si je les avais mis sur papier hier. Mais je ne peux pas imaginer d'avoir écrit si ouvertement sur d'autres sujets. Ça me gêne énormément de lire les pages qui traitent un sujet de me souvenir de comme étant plus gentil qu'ils est en réalité. Mes descriptions sont si plus délicates, mais on essaie de cela. As an English and creative writing major, I understand what Anne Frank wrote on a personal level. On a world stage, Anne Frank wrote on pressing and eye-opening matters which concern the world today. Her work is extremely profound, and this quote left a lasting impact on me.